The worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was the way her face stayed perfectly smooth while she said them, all those expensive injections freezing her skin into a mask of Botox indifference. My sister Cassandra couldn't even manage a decent sneer as she dismantled my entire existence. "You're nothing but a charity case," she said, her forehead frozen in that perpetual look of mild surprise. "An unwanted baby my mother took in because she felt guilty. I'm Alana Whitehead, 29 years old, and until 3 days ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was." The funeral reception churned on around us in our church's community hall. The same room where I'd made my first communion, where my Girl Scout troop met, where I'd always felt the comfortable weight of belonging. Now I stood by the coffee station, stirring my 4th packet of sugar into that terrible church coffee that tastes like disappointment and floor wax, watching Cassandra scan the room like a predator checking for witnesses. Our parents, Robert and Linda Whitehead, died on their 40th anniversary. A drunk driver ran a red light during a thunderstorm. They were probably holding hands at the stoplight, they always did. One moment they were here, laughing about their overpriced anniversary dinner, and the next they were gone. And now, apparently, they were never really mine to lose. Cassandra waited until Aunt Dorothy was across the hall, deep in conversation with the distant cousins. Then she moved in. She spoke quietly at first, almost intimately, like she was sharing a confidence instead of dropping a bomb. She told me about the adoption, not the kind of adoption people celebrate, but the kind, according to her, that happened because my birth mother was a mistake my mother made before she met Dad. They only kept me because the agency had already placed me, she said. Mom was too embarrassed to admit she'd changed her mind. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the coffee table, watching Cousin Brooke's fingers fly across her phone, probably feeding every word into the family group chat like kindling into a fire. Then Cassandra really got started. She walked me through the evidence of my otherness like a prosecutor building a case. Ballet lessons at the expensive studio for her, gymnastics at the YMCA for me, private school tuition, community college, a car at 16 for her, Dad's old Honda at 18 for me, and only because he'd bought himself a new truck, Paris for a semester, the hardware store for minimum wage. The signs were always there, she said. You were just too desperate to see them. Aunt Dorothy finally noticed something was wrong and started pushing through the crowd, but Cassandra wasn't finished. She pulled a folder from her designer purse, though I couldn't help noticing the logo spelled Channel instead of Chanel, and waved it like a championship trophy. She announced, loudly enough for the relatives closest to us to hear, that Mom and Dad's estate was worth $2 million, the house, Dad's hardware business, their investments, and then she delivered what she clearly believed was the killing blow. As their only biological child, she said, I inherit everything. You get nothing, absolutely nothing, because blood matters, and you don't have theirs. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the hall like ripples in dirty water. Aunt Dorothy reached us and began arguing with Cassandra about decency and timing, but Cousin Brooke was already backing her up, saying everyone had always suspected I was different anyway. Different, like I was some kind of imposter who'd finally been caught. Cassandra gave me 30 days to move out of the family home where I'd been living for the past 2 years, helping Mom with her arthritis, managing Dad's inventory at the hardware store, saving money like a good daughter should. She said she was being generous. Legally, she could have me out tomorrow. That night, I sat in what I'd always called my childhood bedroom and stared at photographs that suddenly felt like evidence. My 5th birthday party, Cassandra perfectly centered in pristine pink while I stood off to the side, chocolate cake smeared on my face, wearing something that looked obviously secondhand. Had every birthday wish been obligation? Every goodnight kiss been guilt? Every proud smile at my high school graduation been performance? My best friend Megan texted within hours, the Milbrook gossip network moves faster than Wi-Fi. She said to fight back. Hire a lawyer. Don't let Cassandra steal your life. My boyfriend Jake called with different advice. Maybe walk away, he suggested. Fighting over money would make me just as ugly as Cassandra. I wanted to scream that this wasn't about money. It was about identity, about belonging. About waking up at 29 years old and discovering that maybe you never had a real family at all. The next morning, I heard Cassandra downstairs talking to a locksmith about changing the locks. She wanted the fancy electronic ones but had brought the wrong key to copy, an old padlock key instead of the house key. The locksmith had to explain 3 times that you can't make a house key from a gym locker key. It would have been funny if cruelty could be funny. Later, her husband Derek delivered a formal eviction notice. He couldn't meet my eyes and mumbled an apology before practically running back to his car. The following days passed in a blur of revelations and smaller humiliations. I found myself examining every memory through this new, sharper lens. The time Dad said, "Family isn't about blood. It's about showing up," I'd thought he was being philosophical. Now it sounded like confession. The way Mom sometimes looked at me with soft sadness, now I knew she was seeing someone else's child. Cassandra wasted no time establishing her reign. She went to the bank, demanding access to accounts. She called Dad's business manager, announcing changes. She told anyone who would listen that I'd been cut out of the will because our parents discovered I'd been stealing from them, a complete fabrication that spread through Milbrook like poison through a well. Mrs. Brennan, Mom's best friend for 20 years, crossed the street to avoid me at the grocery store. The pharmacist who'd known me since elementary school suddenly needed to check inventory when I came in. At the coffee shop where I'd worked summers during high school, conversations stopped when I walked through the door, replaced by uncomfortable silence and averted eyes. Cassandra had been thorough. She told people I had a drug problem, that I'd been stealing Mom's pain medication, that our parents had been planning an intervention before they died. The medication lie was especially cruel. Mom had suffered from severe arthritis for 5 years, and I'd been the one managing her prescriptions, driving her to appointments, making sure she took her pills on schedule. But Cassandra had twisted my care into theft. In a small town, the most dramatic story always wins. I found more evidence in the attic. A box labeled Family Photos 1990 to 1994 contained nothing but pictures of Mom, Dad, and baby Cassandra. They looked complete, perfect, a family of 3 that clearly didn't need anyone else. Then a gap, nearly 2 years with no photos, and suddenly I appeared as a toddler, wearing mismatched clothes, holding a teddy bear that looked older than I was. Megan came over that evening and found me surrounded by photo albums, crying over my first day of school, me standing slightly apart from the family like someone had photoshopped me in after the fact. She argued I was letting Cassandra get in my head. Our parents loved me regardless of biology. Then she pointed out something odd. In all the baby pictures of Cassandra, Mom looked exhausted but happy, typically new mother. But in my earliest photos, Mom looked sad, grieving, almost, even when she was smiling. Jake's response was less supportive. He suggested that maybe this explained why I'd always been so independent, why I never asked for help even when I needed it. He said it like it was a character defect, like being adopted meant I was broken somehow. When I told him to leave, he actually said Cassandra had warned him I might become unstable when I learned the truth. They'd been talking about me behind my back, and he'd believed her. The truth about Cassandra's lies became clearer when Derek called from his car that evening, whispering like he was afraid of being overheard. He admitted Cassandra had been planning this for months, ever since our parents updated their will 6 months ago. She'd hired a lawyer friend to research inheritance law, specifically about adopted versus biological children. She'd been building her case that I was an interloper who'd taken resources meant for the real daughter. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. Cassandra had been stealing from our parents for years, taking money from their accounts, using their credit cards, selling Mom's jewelry and replacing it with fakes. Almost $400,000 over 5 years, taken in small amounts that looked like normal expenses. Our parents had noticed eventually, about a year ago, but they never confronted her because Cassandra had threatened to tell me about the adoption in the cruelest way possible if they did. The thought that my parents had endured theft and betrayal to protect me from exactly what was happening now made me physically ill. They'd chosen my emotional well-being over their financial security, and Cassandra had used their love for me as a weapon against them. 3 days into my eviction notice, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. The man identified himself as Mr. Thornfield and Associates, my parents' attorney for 35 years. His voice was careful, measured, like someone who'd learned to speak in ways that couldn't be misinterpreted. He informed me that Cassandra had indeed shown him a will, But there were other documents she didn't know about. Documents my parents had specifically instructed him to keep confidential until after their deaths. He suggested we meet. Not at his office. Cassandra had been calling hourly with threats and had someone watching his building. Instead, he proposed the coffee shop on Maple Street at 2 o'clock. Before the meeting, I remembered something Derek had said about checking Mom's jewelry box. I found it in her closet. The painted blue flowers faded from years of handling. The bottom felt too thick. When I pressed around the edges, a hidden compartment opened. Inside was a safe deposit key and a note in Mom's handwriting. For Alana, the truth matters. Also inside was an old padlock key, the same kind Cassandra had confused for a house key at the locksmith's. She must have found one like it somewhere and assumed it was important. Cassandra's campaign against me had intensified. She'd convinced Cousin Brooke and 2 others to sign statements claiming they'd witnessed me asking our parents for money repeatedly, pressuring them to change their will. Brooke owed Cassandra $5,000 from a failed business venture. The other cousins had their own financial promises. The worst part was when she accidentally sent a text meant for Brooke to the entire family WhatsApp group. Remember, if anyone asks, Alana has been unstable for years. I've already told the lawyers she's been stealing. Once the house sells, you'll get your money plus extra for helping. Mom always said Alana was a mistake we had to live with, and now we can finally fix that mistake. The family explosion was immediate. Aunt Dorothy posted screenshots to Facebook with a scathing commentary about greed and disgrace. Uncle Pete called Cassandra directly and told her she was no longer welcome at family gatherings. Several cousins left the group chat in protest. Cassandra tried to claim her phone had been hacked, but the damage was done. Her own greed had exposed her. At the coffee shop, Mr. Thornfield waited in a corner booth with a thick folder. He looked like every old-fashioned lawyer from every movie, wire-rimmed glasses, a suit that had probably been stylish when he bought it in 1995. But his eyes were sharp, and when he started talking, I realized my parents had chosen their protector well. He began with a story from 35 years ago. My father's younger sister, Rebecca, had been 17 and pregnant. The father vanished the moment she told him. Rebecca herself was sick, a heart condition that made the pregnancy dangerous. My parents, newly married and trying for their own child, had taken her in. She lived with them throughout the pregnancy, and they'd promised to raise her baby as their own if anything happened to her. Rebecca died within hours of giving birth to me. She'd lived just long enough to name me Alana, after our grandmother, and to make my parents promise I'd always know I was loved. The adoption had been legal and formal. I was their daughter in every way that mattered. But here was the twist that changed everything. Cassandra wasn't their biological child either. She'd been adopted at age 2 from Dad's cousin who couldn't care for her. She'd known this truth since she turned 18, and she'd used it as leverage against our parents ever since. Mr. Thornfield pulled out a document that made my hands shake. 20 years ago, when I was 9 and Cassandra had started her blackmail, my parents had created a trust. They'd placed almost everything in it: the house, the business, the investments, everything except about $50,000 in checking accounts. The will Cassandra had been waving around only covered what wasn't in the trust. And the trust had one beneficiary. Me. Mr. Thornfield explained that my parents had documented everything over the years. Every forged check Cassandra had written, every credit card she'd opened in their names, every piece of Mom's jewelry she'd stolen and replaced with fakes. They'd kept receipts, bank statements, photos of the fake jewelry next to appraisals of the real pieces. They'd built an airtight case but never used it because they still loved Cassandra despite everything, still hoped she might change. The $400,000 she'd stolen had come in waves. First small amounts, a few hundred here and there that they attributed to their own forgetfulness, then thousands at a time, always with some excuse. Cassandra would claim she'd paid for things they'd asked for, house repairs that never happened, medical bills that didn't exist. By the time they realized the full scope, she was taking tens of thousands. And when they tried to confront her, she threatened to destroy me with the truth about my adoption. Derek had seen some of this documentation 2 weeks ago when Cassandra dragged him to Thornfield's office, trying to intimidate the lawyer into giving her everything immediately, while Cassandra was screaming about her rights. Derek had noticed papers on Thornfield's desk about the trust. He'd taken a photo when she wasn't looking. That's why he tried to warn me, though he was too scared of his wife to be more direct. Thornfield scheduled an official will reading at the courthouse for the following week. He warned me that Cassandra would likely escalate when she learned about the trust. But my parents had been specific in their instructions. They wanted the truth revealed publicly, in front of witnesses, so there could be no question about their intentions or their love for me. The safe deposit box I opened that afternoon contained everything Thornfield had described and more. Letters from Rebecca, including one addressed to her future child, to me, saying she was sorry she couldn't be there, but she was leaving me with the best parents in the world. Photos showing we had the same eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same wild hair that never quite behaved. A DNA test my parents had done when I was 5, confirming I was Robert's biological niece. But the most heartbreaking discovery was a journal Mom had kept. Entry after entry detailed Cassandra's escalating behavior, the pain of being stolen from by one daughter while trying to protect another, the impossible position Cassandra had put them in. One entry from last year read, "We failed Cassandra by giving her things instead of boundaries, but we will not fail Alana by letting Cassandra destroy her sense of self. The trust will protect her when we're gone." Cassandra, meanwhile, had already started spending money she didn't have. Derek called to warn me she'd bought a Range Rover on credit, joined the most expensive country club in the area, hired contractors for a $200,000 renovation of our parents' house. She was so confident in her inheritance that she'd told everyone she was expecting over $3 million within the month. The town was starting to turn against her. Her behavior at the funeral, wearing what looked like a rejected outfit from a reality TV show, all leather and lace to our parents' memorial, had already raised eyebrows. The locksmith had told everyone about her confusion with the keys. The bank manager had shared how she'd screamed about discrimination when they wouldn't give her immediate access to accounts. Even her fake designer bags had become a running joke, especially after the handle of her Gucci bag broke during the funeral reception, spilling its contents across the church floor. 3 days before the will reading, Cassandra decided to host what she called a memorial gathering at our parents' house. She sent out formal invitations on expensive cardstock. But the real purpose was obvious. She wanted to stake her claim publicly, show everyone she was in charge. I wasn't invited, but Aunt Dorothy insisted on bringing me anyway. When we arrived, Cassandra had already removed Mom's beloved garden decorations and replaced the handmade welcome mat with something generic from a store. Inside, she'd laid out Mom's possessions like a garage sale, with little tags showing who would get what. Everyone was getting something. Except me. Cassandra stood at the head of the dining room table, wearing white to our parents' memorial gathering, and started distributing items like she was dealing cards at a casino. When she put Mom's wedding ring on her own finger, I couldn't stay silent. I reminded her that Mom had promised that ring to me, had told me on her last birthday that it would be mine someday. The room went quiet. Cassandra laughed and said the gathering was for family only, real family. That's when Aunt Dorothy stood up. "I'm more family than you're acting like." Several relatives nodded in agreement. Cassandra's careful performance started to crack. And then Mr. Thornfield walked in. He carried his briefcase and wore his best suit. He looked like a man on a mission, and his timing couldn't have been more perfect. The entire family was there to witness what happened next. He addressed Cassandra formally, using her married name, and informed her that the official reading of our parents' complete estate documentation would take place in 3 days at the county courthouse. Cassandra's frozen face couldn't show surprise, but her eyes went wide. "I've already seen the will," she said. "You've seen a will, Mr. Thornfield corrected gently. "You haven't seen the trust." He didn't stay for the chaos that followed. He simply nodded to me, to Aunt Dorothy, and walked back out into the afternoon sun. Cassandra turned on me, her voice rising to a pitch that shattered her performance of control. "What trust? What did you do? What did Mom and Dad do?" I didn't answer. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like crying. I felt like watching. The next 72 hours were something between a nightmare and a revelation. Cassandra's spending spree caught up with her. The Range Rover was repossessed from the driveway. The country club called about her initiation fee check bouncing. The contractors she'd hired demanded payment she couldn't make. Derek moved out. Finally done with the wife he'd been terrified of for years. He came to see me before he left town, carrying a box of documents he'd taken from Cassandra's files. More evidence, more lies, more proof of just how deep her deception ran. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have said something years ago." I accepted his apology but couldn't quite forgive him. He'd watched my parents being stolen from for years. He'd watched me being destroyed and only whispered warnings from his car when he thought he wouldn't get caught. Some cowardice is too comfortable to be innocent. The morning of the will reading, I dressed carefully. Not in black, I'd worn enough black. Instead, I wore a blue dress that matched Mom's favorite sweater, the one she'd worn every Sunday. I put on the small pearl earrings Dad had given me for my 16th birthday. I looked in the mirror and saw someone who was about to learn the final truth. The courthouse was small, like everything in Milbrook. The room where they held probate hearings had wooden benches that creaked when you sat down and windows that let in the weak October sun. Most of the family was there. Aunt Dorothy sat beside me, holding my hand. Megan sat on my other side, shooting daggers at Cassandra with her eyes. Cassandra sat alone on the opposite side of the room. Her designer dress was real this time. She couldn't afford fakes anymore, but it looked wrong on her, like she was wearing someone else's skin. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup too heavy. Without Derek beside her, without her stolen confidence, she looked small, diminished. Mr. Thornfield stood at the front of the room beside the probate judge, a woman with kind eyes and efficient hands who'd probably seen every kind of family ugliness in her career, the kind of woman who wouldn't be impressed by Cassandra's theatrics. The reading took less than 30 minutes. Mr. Thornfield presented the will, the real will, the one that worked in concert with the trust. He presented the trust documents, signed and notarized and dated 20 years ago. He presented the documentation of Cassandra's thefts, the forged checks, the falsified credit card applications, the stolen jewelry replaced with fakes. The judge asked if anyone wished to contest. Cassandra stood up, her voice cracking. "This can't be right. I'm the daughter. I'm the real daughter." The judge looked at her over her reading glasses. According to these documents, both daughters were adopted, both were equally loved, and both were provided for, one through the trust, and one through separate arrangements your parents made years ago. She explained it simply. The trust was mine, the house, the business, the investments. But Cassandra wasn't left with nothing. Our parents had set aside a separate fund for her 15 years ago, hoping she'd eventually mature enough to deserve it. $50,000, held in trust until she turned 40 or demonstrated genuine change. Cassandra was 35. She'd stolen almost $400,000. She'd spent most of it, and now she had 15 years to wait for $50,000 that wouldn't even cover what she owed. The theft documentation was being turned over to the district attorney. Cassandra would likely face charges. She stood in the middle of the courtroom, surrounded by family who'd witnessed her cruelty, and for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow, exhausted, ready for it all to be over. Afterward, people crowded around me, hugging me, apologizing for believing Cassandra's lies, promising to do better. Aunt Dorothy cried and kept saying how proud Mom and Dad would be. Megan took me home, to my home now, legally and truly mine. We sat in the kitchen where I'd done homework as a child, where Mom had taught me to bake cookies, where Dad had drunk his coffee every morning before heading to the hardware store. He would have loved this, Megan said softly. Your dad, watching you stand up to her. He'd have hated the whole thing, I corrected. He hated conflict. He'd have wanted us to work it out. But we couldn't, because of her. I nodded. Some truths are too broken to fix. That night, I went through Mom's journal again. Read the entries I'd skipped before, the ones about my childhood, my first steps, my first words, my first day of school. Read about how Rebecca's death had nearly destroyed my parents, how holding me had saved them. Read about the sleepless nights when I had colic, the pride when I learned to read, the joy when I discovered I loved working with Dad at the store. Read the last entry, dated 2 days before the accident. Alana came over for dinner tonight. She helped me with my pills, then fixed the garbage disposal without being asked. She's so much like Rebecca, that same stubborn independence, that same unwillingness to be a burden. Robert and I watched her drive away and talked about how lucky we were. Not many people get to raise the best parts of the people they've lost. We should have told her about Rebecca years ago. We should have told her everything. But every time we tried, we saw how much she loved being our daughter, and we couldn't risk making her feel like less. Cassandra's threats were real, but our fear was real too. The trust will protect her when we're gone, but I hope she knows, wherever she is reading this, that the trust was just money. The love was always real. The choice was always her. We chose her every single day, not because we had to, but because she was the best thing that ever happened to us. She's not Rebecca's daughter anymore. She's not adopted. She's just Alana, and she's ours. I closed the journal and sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the house settle around me. The same creaks and groans I'd heard my whole life. The same refrigerator hum. The same wind in the same trees. Outside, a car passed on the quiet street. Someone's dog barked twice, then stopped. The world kept turning, indifferent to my grief and my revelation and my complicated, impossible inheritance. In 3 days, Cassandra would be arrested. In a week, she'd be out on bail, staying with cousin Brooke, who suddenly wasn't so loyal without the promise of money. In a month, I'd have to decide whether to press charges or let it go, a choice I still didn't know how to make. But tonight, I sat in my mother's kitchen, wearing my father's old sweater, holding my birth mother's letters, and tried to figure out who I was now. Alana, just Alana. Daughter of Rebecca, who gave me life and then couldn't stay. Daughter of Robert and Linda, who chose me every day for 29 years. Sister of Cassandra, who chose to destroy instead of love. The house felt different now, not haunted, exactly, but watched over, like my parents were still here, still present in the walls they'd painted and the floors they'd walked and the garden Mom had tended every spring until her hands hurt too much. I thought about selling it, starting fresh somewhere no one knew my name or my story, but leaving felt like losing them all over again. So I stayed. That first night, I slept in my childhood bed for the first time since learning the truth, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't dream about funerals or courtrooms or Cassandra's frozen, expressionless face. I dreamed about Rebecca. I don't know what she looked like, only photos, only guesses, but in my dream, she was young and scared and hopeful, holding me in a hospital room, telling me she was sorry, telling me I was loved, telling me I'd be okay. I woke up crying, but it was a different kind of crying, not grief for what I'd lost, but something closer to gratitude for what I'd been given. The next morning, I drove to the hardware store for the first time since the accident. Dad's business manager, Mr. Patterson, met me at the door with a handshake and a sad smile. "Your father talked about you constantly," he said. "Every customer who came in heard about his daughter, the inventory manager, his daughter who fixed the accounting system, his daughter who knew more about plumbing supplies than most plumbers." I laughed despite myself. "I don't know about that. He was proud of you, not because you were adopted or biological or any of that, because you were you." I walked through the store, touching the shelves Dad had built, the counter where he'd stood for 40 years, the office where I'd spent countless afternoons learning the business. It was mine now, all of it, not because I'd earned it, not because I'd fought for it, but because my parents had loved me enough to protect me even after they were gone. Cassandra called that afternoon. I almost didn't answer. "I'm sorry," were her first words, and for just a moment, I believed her. Then she kept talking. "I'm sorry you feel like you have to do this. I'm sorry you're so angry. But you have to understand, I'm the one who lost everything. I'm the one who grew up thinking I was their real daughter and then found out I wasn't. At least you always knew you were adopted. I didn't find out until I was 18. So don't act like I'm the villain here." I listened to her twist herself into the victim, rewrite history into a story where she was the wronged party, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not hurt, just a strange, hollow clarity. "Cassandra," I said when she finally paused for breath, "you stole from them, you threatened them, you lied about me to everyone in town, you wore white to their memorial and tried to give away their possessions like they were party favors." Silence. "I'm not your enemy, I never was, but I'm also not your victim anymore." I hung up and blocked her number. The weeks that followed were strange and slow and sometimes beautiful. Megan came over every evening for the first week, bringing takeout and gossip and stubborn friendship. Aunt Dorothy organized a family dinner where people apologized and cried and promised to do better. Even Cousin Brooke showed up, looking smaller than I remembered, mumbling something about being sorry and being used and being ashamed. I accepted the apologies because holding on to anger felt like carrying rocks in my pockets. But I didn't forget. Forgetting would mean Cassandra had won something after all. The hardware store kept running. Mr. Patterson handled the day-to-day while I learned the parts of the business Dad had always managed himself. I discovered I was good at it, not just competent, but genuinely good. Dad's customers kept coming back, and slowly they stopped looking at me like a curiosity and started looking at me like the owner. Mom's garden went dormant for winter, but I could already picture what it would look like in spring. She'd planted daffodils years ago, and they came back every year without fail. I'd keep them going, add some of my own, make the garden mine while still honoring hers. I found Rebecca's grave eventually, in a cemetery 30 miles away where my parents had buried her all those years ago, a small headstone, almost hidden by overgrowth. Rebecca Whitehead, beloved daughter and sister. No mention of me, no mention of the baby she'd died to bring into the world. I cleaned the headstone, planted flowers, and sat on the cold ground for a long time, trying to feel something for a woman I'd never known. You did good, I told her finally. You picked the right people. I turned out okay. It was the best I could do. Jake called twice. I didn't call back. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness, and some people don't deserve the chance to apologize. He'd believed Cassandra over me. He'd called me broken. He could live with that choice. Derek sent a postcard from Florida, where he'd moved to stay with his brother. Starting over. He wrote, "Wish I'd done it years ago. Hope you're okay." I was more than okay. I was learning. I was learning that family isn't about blood or biology or any of the things Cassandra had weaponized. Family is about showing up, about choosing each other, about protecting each other even when it costs you something. My parents had shown up for me every single day. They'd chosen me when they didn't have to. They'd protected me from Cassandra's worst cruelty for 20 years, absorbing her theft and her threats to keep me whole. They'd loved me, not because of Rebecca, not because of obligation, but because I was theirs. I was theirs. The trust gave me money, the house gave me shelter, the store gave me purpose. But the journal gave me something more. Those pages, filled with Mom's careful handwriting, documenting everything from my first word to my parents' last fears, they gave me proof that I'd been wanted, chosen, loved without condition. I read the journal often in those first months, not obsessively, but deliberately, like visiting old friends who couldn't stay but had left letters behind. Each entry reminded me that my memories weren't lies, that the childhood I remembered was real, that every birthday and every goodnight kiss and every proud smile had been genuine. Christmas came. I spent it with Aunt Dorothy and Megan and a collection of relatives who were trying hard to make up for lost time. We ate too much, laughed too loud, and toasted my parents with the good wine Mom had always saved for special occasions. Cassandra spent Christmas in a different part of the state, living with a friend from high school who'd taken her in despite everything. The charges were still pending, negotiations ongoing. I'd told the district attorney I didn't want to pursue prosecution if she'd agree to restitution and counseling. She'd refused both, so the case continued. Some people can't be saved from themselves. On New Year's Eve, I stood in my parents' backyard, and watched fireworks bloom over Milbrook. The house was warm behind me, full of people who loved me. Megan was inside making popcorn. Aunt Dorothy was arguing with Uncle Pete about whether midnight counted if you were on Eastern Time. Cousin Brooke was quietly washing dishes, still trying to earn back trust she wasn't sure she deserved. I thought about Rebecca, dead at 17, never knowing what her daughter would become. I thought about my parents, gone too soon, but not before making sure I'd be okay. I thought about Cassandra, alone somewhere, still believing she was the victim. And I thought about myself. 29 years old, orphaned, adopted, chosen, loved. The fireworks burst overhead, green and gold and red, and I made a wish that wasn't really a wish, more of a promise. I would live the life they'd given me. I would honor their choice by being someone worth choosing. I would take the store they'd built and make it stronger. I would tend the garden my mother loved. I would tell their story, our story, to anyone who needed to hear that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other. It's about love that doesn't quit, even when quitting would be easier. The clock struck midnight. Inside, everyone cheered. Megan opened the door and called my name. Her face lit with laughter and hope and the kind of friendship that feels like family. I turned away from the fireworks and walked toward the light. Toward home. Toward the life my parents had given me, not through biology or obligation, but through the simple, radical act of choosing to love someone who needed loving. I was Alana Whitehead, 29 years old, daughter of Rebecca, daughter of Robert and Linda, sister of Cassandra, owner of a hardware store, keeper of a garden, survivor of a revelation that should have destroyed me but somehow didn't. And I was exactly where I belonged. He emphasized the word, complete, in a way that made Cassandra's face go pale beneath her spray tan, when she insisted she had the will and didn't need any formal reading. Thornfield smiled the way a chess player does before checkmate. He explained that while she did indeed have a will, it wasn't the only legal document pertaining to the estate. He'd been instructed by my parents to present all documentation publicly, in court, with witnesses present. Any attempt to dispose of estate assets before then would be considered theft. His eyes moved to Mom's wedding ring, which Cassandra was still wearing. She tried to pull it off, but her fingers had swollen from stress and too much wine at lunch. The entire family watched as she struggled, yanking and twisting, finally having to excuse herself to the kitchen for soap. We could hear her cursing and running water, and Uncle Pete muttered something about trash always revealing itself eventually. When she returned, her finger was red and raw, and the ring was finally off, placed on the table like evidence she wished she could hide. Aunt Dorothy had been secretly recording everything on her phone, pretending to take pictures of Mom's china. She'd captured Cassandra's speech about real family and biological rights, her claim that I was never wanted, and her attempt to sell off family heirlooms before the estate was even settled. The video was already being shared in the family group chat that Cassandra had been removed from after her accidental text revelation. The best moment came when Cassandra's latest fake designer bag, a poor imitation of Gucci with the logo spelled wrong, finally gave up entirely. The bottom seam split open, spilling everything onto Mom's dining room floor. Out fell 3 of Mom's credit cards she'd stolen, past due notices for thousands in debt, printed emails where she was trying to sell Dad's classic car before the estate settled, and most damning, a handwritten list titled, After Inheritance, that included paying off $60,000 in credit card debt and buying a vacation home in Florida. Derek picked up one of the credit card statements, his face going white as he read it. He asked her how they could possibly owe $40,000 to various stores when he thought they'd been saving for a house. Cassandra hissed at him that it would all be paid off once she got her inheritance, that he needed to think bigger, that they were about to be millionaires. But Derek had finally reached his limit. In front of everyone, he announced he'd seen the trust documents when Cassandra had dragged him to threaten Mr. Thornfield 2 weeks ago. He knew she wasn't getting $3 million. He knew about the thefts from our parents. He was done pretending this was normal or acceptable. The man who'd been too scared to stand up to her for 12 years finally found his spine, and it was in front of 40 witnesses. Cassandra tried to salvage the situation by claiming everyone was conspiring against her, that I'd turned the family against the real daughter. But cousin Tyler, one of the ones she'd bribed to lie about me, suddenly spoke up. He admitted she'd promised him Dad's car if he said I'd borrowed money and never paid it back. Brooke, still owing her $5,000, stayed quiet, but her shame was obvious. As the family gathered their coats to leave, Cassandra made one last desperate play. She announced that anyone who sided with me would be cut off from the inheritance, that she had the power to ruin anyone who crossed her. That's when quiet Uncle Pete, who never said much at family gatherings, stood up and told her she was exactly the kind of person our parents had tried to protect me from. He said they'd be ashamed of what she'd become, and that was worse than any inheritance could fix. The courthouse on the day of the will reading was packed beyond capacity. Half of Milbrook had shown up, drawn by the promise of drama that had been building for 2 weeks. The court officer had to turn people away, and someone had even set up a coffee cart outside, like it was some kind of festival. Cassandra arrived with 3 lawyers she couldn't afford, men in expensive suits who looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized their client had lied to them about the basic facts of the case. She was dressed entirely in black this time, trying to look serious and bereaved, but she'd gone too heavy on the self-tanner the night before and looked more orange than mournful. I sat in the front row with Mr. Thornfield on one side and Aunt Dorothy on the other. Behind us, Derek sat alone, having arrived separately from his wife. The rest of the family filled the rows, and even some of Mom's church friends had come, perhaps feeling guilty about how quickly they'd believed Cassandra's lies about me. Judge Patricia Hoffman presided over the reading. She'd known my parents for decades, had bought her first house with Dad's help at the hardware store, and had zero patience for dramatics in her courtroom. When one of Cassandra's lawyers tried to object before Thornfield even started speaking, she shut him down with a look that could freeze fire. Thornfield began by reading the will Cassandra had been waving around for 2 weeks. It was real, properly executed 5 years ago, and it did leave $50,000 to Cassandra, along with some small charitable donations. Cassandra smirked, thinking this validated everything she'd been saying, but Thornfield wasn't done. He pulled out a thick document and explained that 20 years ago, our parents had established the Robert and Linda Whitehead Family Trust. This trust contained the family home, the hardware business, all investment accounts, and approximately $1 million in total assets. The will only governed assets not already in the trust, which amounted to the $50,000 and some personal effects. Cassandra's lawyers immediately started objecting, saying they hadn't been informed of any trust. Thornfield pointed out that it was public record, filed with the court 20 years ago, and any competent attorney would have discovered it with even basic due diligence. The lawyers looked at Cassandra with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, realizing she'd led them into a humiliating situation. When Thornfield announced that I was the sole beneficiary of the trust, Cassandra shot to her feet and screamed that it was impossible, that I wasn't even their real daughter, that I was adopted and had no right to anything. Her voice cracked with rage, and spittle flew from her mouth as she ranted about blood rights and biological superiority. That's when Thornfield delivered the killing blow. He confirmed that yes, I was adopted, legally and formally, after my biological mother, Rebecca Whitehead, died giving birth to me. Rebecca was Robert's younger sister, making me his biological niece, a blood relative. But Cassandra, she was also adopted, taken in at age 2 when her biological mother, Robert's cousin Maria, couldn't care for her. The difference was that Cassandra had known about her adoption for 17 years, since our parents told her when she turned 18. The courtroom erupted. Cassandra stood frozen, her mouth open, unable to speak. Her entire narrative, her claim to biological superiority, her real daughter status, everything she'd based her cruelty on crumbled in seconds. She had tortured me with the truth about my adoption while hiding her own. Thornfield then started the video our parents had recorded. Mom appeared on the screen, looking directly at the camera, and even though I'd watched it once already in the safe deposit box, seeing her again made me cry. She spoke about how they'd loved both of us, how they'd tried to give Cassandra everything she demanded, hoping to fill whatever hole was in her heart, but how the thefts had started 5 years ago and escalated beyond forgiveness. Dad's part was harder to watch. He detailed finding forged checks, discovering credit cards in his name he'd never applied for, realizing Cassandra had sold Mom's mother's jewelry and replaced it with fakes. He showed receipts, bank statements, photos comparing real jewelry to the replacements, $400,000 over 5 years taken by the daughter they'd raised, while they protected the daughter they'd chosen from the truth being weaponized against her. The video continued with Mom explaining the most painful part. She said Cassandra had discovered the truth about my adoption through snooping in their papers when I was 9. She'd immediately used it as blackmail, threatening to tell me in the cruelest way possible unless they paid for her private college, bought her cars, funded her lifestyle. Every inequality in our childhoods that I'd wondered about had been extortion. They'd created the trust that same year, when I was 9 and Cassandra was 15, specifically to protect my inheritance from her greed. They'd known even then that she would try to take everything if given the chance. The lawyer who'd helped them set it up had warned them to tell me the truth. But they'd wanted to preserve my innocence, to let me have a childhood free from the knowledge that my sister saw me as an interloper. But the most shocking revelation was about the theft. Dad explained that they'd actually noticed the stealing much earlier than 5 years ago. Small amounts had been disappearing for a decade, but they'd made excuses, attributed it to their own forgetfulness. It was only when Cassandra got greedier, taking thousands at a time, that they'd been forced to acknowledge what was happening. They documented everything, but never pressed charges because they still loved her, still hoped she might change. The video showed Mom holding up a box of evidence, every forged check, every fraudulent credit card statement, every fake piece of jewelry, every receipt for things Cassandra had bought with stolen money. They'd kept it all, not for revenge, but for protection. They knew that someday the truth would have to come out, and they wanted me protected when it did. The final part of the video was them speaking directly to me. Dad said I was never a mistake, never unwanted, never second best. Rebecca had been Mom's best friend before becoming her sister-in-law, and they loved me even before I was born. When Rebecca died, they didn't see it as taking on a burden, but as receiving a gift, the daughter they'd been praying for. Mom's last words on the video were the ones that broke me completely. She looked at the camera and said that blood might make you related, but choice makes you family. And they'd chosen me every day for 29 years and would choose me again in whatever came after. She said the trust wasn't about money, but about protection, ensuring that their chosen daughter was safe from the one who'd chosen greed over gratitude. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent except for muffled crying. Even Judge Hoffman was wiping her eyes. The only person not crying was Cassandra, though not for lack of trying. The Botox had frozen her face so completely that she couldn't even produce tears properly, making her look even more inhuman in that moment of exposure. Cassandra's lawyers were already packing their briefcases, realizing they'd been brought here under false pretenses. One of them whispered to another that she'd told them I was a drug addict who'd manipulated my parents into changing their will. They wanted nothing more to do with her and were probably already calculating how to get out of the representation without getting sued themselves. But Cassandra wasn't done. She screamed that the video was fake, that I'd coerced our parents, that Thornfield was in on some conspiracy. She claimed the trust documents were forged, that the adoption papers were fabricated, that everyone was lying except her. Her voice got higher and more hysterical with each accusation until she was basically shrieking incoherently. That's when Derek stood up in front of the entire courtroom. He announced he'd filed for divorce that morning. He said he'd watched her steal from her parents, lie about her sister, and destroy a family out of pure greed. He'd been weak and complicit for too long, but he was done. He actually apologized to me in front of everyone, saying he should have spoken up years ago, but had been too cowardly. Judge Hoffman had heard enough. She banged her gavel and declared that the trust was valid and would be executed as written. I would receive everything in the trust, while Cassandra would receive the $50,000 from the will, though she noted that evidence of theft could lead to criminal charges that might affect even that inheritance. As if on cue, Officer Mitchell from the Sheriff's Department entered the courtroom. He announced that based on the evidence provided in the video and documentation, they were opening an investigation into fraud, elder abuse, and theft. Cassandra was being charged, and while she wasn't being arrested that day, she needed to surrender her passport and would be formally arraigned the following week. Cassandra's final moment of humiliation came as she tried to storm out of the courtroom. In her rage and hurry, she tripped over her own fake designer bag, the strap tangling around her heel. She went down hard, and when she hit the floor, her self-tanner left an orange smear on the white courthouse tiles. Someone took a photo that would circulate around Milbrook for months with various captions about karma and falling from grace. 6 months have passed since that day in the courthouse, and life in Milbrook has found a new rhythm. I'm living in my parents' house, our house now, though it still feels strange to think of it as mine alone. The garden is thriving with the tomatoes Mom would have planted, and I've kept Dad's workshop exactly as he left it, down to the half-finished birdhouse on his workbench. Cassandra was convicted of fraud and elder abuse, though the judge suspended her sentence on condition of 500 hours of community service and full restitution. The $50,000 from the will went straight to legal fees, leaving her with nothing. The Range Rover was repossessed within a week, the country club membership cancelled, and all those credit cards she'd maxed out. expecting millions, were now her problem alone. Megan saw her last week working at a phone case kiosk in the mall, trying to convince customers that bedazzled cases were worth $80. The designer clothes and expensive makeup were gone, replaced by the mall uniform and exhaustion. When our eyes met across the food court, she looked away first. There was no apology in her expression, just the bitter resignation of someone whose schemes had finally caught up with them. Derek sent me a letter last month, a real apology this time. He admitted he'd known about the thefts from the beginning, but had been too afraid of being alone to leave her. He was in therapy now, living with his brother, trying to understand how he'd become someone who could watch his wife destroy her family and say nothing. I wrote back that forgiveness was a process, but I was working on it. The cousins who'd lied for Cassandra had come forward with the truth once the video played. Brooke cried when she admitted Cassandra had threatened to call in her debt unless she supported the lies. Tyler confessed that the promise of Dad's car had seemed worth a small lie at the time. They were family, and families forgive, but trust once broken takes time to rebuild. With part of the inheritance, I established the Robert and Linda Whitehead Memorial Scholarship at the community college. It's specifically for adopted children or those aging out of foster care, because family shouldn't be about blood or biology, but about choosing to show up for each other. The first recipient was a girl named Rebecca, which felt like a sign from somewhere. The hardware store is thriving under Uncle Pete's management. He's brought in his son James to learn the business, keeping it in the family the way Dad would have wanted. I stop by sometimes, and the smell of sawdust and metal still reminds me of Saturday mornings when Dad would let me help sort screws and bolts, never mentioning that I was probably making more work for him. Mr. Thornfield and I have lunch once a month. He tells me stories about my parents when they were young, about how excited they'd been when Rebecca came to live with them, how they'd prepared for my arrival like I was their own pregnancy. He recently told me that the teddy bear in those early photos, the one I thought looked old, had been Rebecca's. She'd insisted I have it, her last gift to the daughter she'd never raise. The truth about why my parents gave Cassandra more when we were growing up finally made sense when Thornfield showed me the full financial records. Every expensive thing Cassandra had received, the private school, the car, the trips, had been paid for with money from her biological family. Maria's parents, feeling guilty about their daughter abandoning Cassandra, had sent money for years. My parents had never touched it, saving it all for Cassandra's expenses. They'd been scrupulously fair, even when it looked unfair. Aunt Dorothy has become my closest confidant. She told me she'd been there when I was born in the middle of that snowstorm, with Dad helping deliver me because the roads were impassable. She'd held Rebecca's hand while Rebecca held me for the only time, just long enough to whisper my name and make everyone promise I'd always know I was loved. Dorothy had kept that promise in her heart for 29 years. Last week, I was planting bulbs for spring when I found myself talking to my parents, telling them about the scholarship recipients, about the store, about how their tomatoes had won first place at the county fair. I told them about seeing Cassandra at the mall and feeling not anger, but pity. She'd had everything: parents who loved her, a sister who admired her, a husband who supported her, and she'd thrown it all away for money that was never really hers. The last time I saw her was yesterday at the grocery store. She was buying generic brands and counting change. The woman who'd once spent $40,000 she didn't have on credit cards. Our eyes met over the produce section, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been regret. But then she turned away, and I realized some people never learn that wealth isn't about what's in your bank account, but about who shows up when you need them. Standing in Mom's garden now, watching the sun set over the Connecticut hills, I think about what family really means. It's not DNA or blood tests or birth certificates. It's Dad teaching me to use a level even though I was too young to really help. It's Mom saving for months to buy me the prom dress I wanted, even though Cassandra's extortion meant money was tight. It's Aunt Dorothy keeping a secret for decades to protect me. It's even Mr. Thornfield, who could have retired years ago, but stayed on because he'd promised my parents he'd see their wishes through. Cassandra might have been right about one thing: I was adopted, but she was wrong about everything else. I wasn't a mistake or a charity case or an interloper. I was chosen, deliberately and lovingly chosen, by parents who protected me even from beyond the grave. They'd seen what was coming and built walls of legal documents and trust funds to keep me safe from the sister who'd chosen greed over family. Blood makes you related. That's just biology and chance. But loyalty makes you family. And love makes you chosen. And in the end, being chosen is everything.